Hey everyone, this is Arif. I just have a quick ask before we get into the show today. If you could just please subscribe to the podcast and whatever player you're listening to this on and leave us a 5-star rating and review. That does the absolute most to get our name out there and help people find us. If you're looking for any other way to support the show, you can head over to thelifeofxpodcast.com and click on our support page. All right, thank you. Enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to the podcast. My name is Arif Jadala.
And my name is Melvin Barnes.
And this is The Life of X. This is the second and final episode of Wilt Chamberlain.
The Big Dipper.
Yeah, and so last time we pretty much covered his early life through his college playing days, and in this episode we are going to discuss his pro career through the end of his life.
Time to make some money.
That's right. Do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I'll jump on in. So we left off with Wilt leaving school. Now, he couldn't go directly to the NBA. So what he ends up doing is playing a year with the Harlem Globetrotters.
Yeah, and also, just to interject, let's not forget that Wilt has already been drafted by an NBA team. He'd already been drafted by the hometown Philadelphia Warriors, but due to the rules of the day, you weren't allowed to play until you had been out of high school for 4 years. And so Wilt had this
gap year
where, he saw the opportunity to make some dough, support his family.
So he took it.
He did. And
when he signs with the Globetrotters, he's making a whopping, and at the time, I mean whopping, $65K for 1 year. Now, this is kind of interesting in that the Globetrotters are actually not from Harlem. The team is actually from Chicago. They were initially known as the Savoy Big Five, and they played in ballrooms. They were actually a legit ball team.
Savoy Big Ballers.
Oh God, they were
actually grandfather.
They were actually a legitimate basketball team before they realized it's way more lucrative for them to be funny and entertaining.
Yeah, and the reason that they were even like a draw was because it was not common to have a team of all African Americans playing, which is why it was this novelty, like, oh, come and watch these African Americans play. I mean,
believe it or not, there were like the notions that they couldn't grasp the game. If watch one of the movies, like Glory Road, and you'll get a little some nuggets of that throughout. But no, they were a basketball team from Chicago, and they were far more popular than the NBA at the time, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting too that they chose Harlem as their quote unquote home because they ended up being a travel team. So they went all over the country and eventually all over the world. But they chose Harlem because, again, being that they were an all black team at the time, Harlem was the cultural center for African Americans.
Yeah. So Wilt actually, he really enjoyed this year of playing with the Globetrotters. I mean, I can't imagine why he's not getting mugged every day when he goes to play basketball. So he's loving...
And he's getting paid so much money.
Yeah.
And what we mentioned last time was that, even the NBA, their average salaries were around $9,000 per year. And even before Wilt, the top paid Globetrotter was making $35,000, which is a ton of money then.
So rising seas going to lift all boats.
That's right.
Wilt's bringing in the dough. And he's also getting a great experience. He's traveling the world. The Globetrotters actually traveled to Moscow in what year? Do you know the year? 59?
I believe it was 1959.
1959. So for those of us who are not steeped in the historical field and the history, this is of course at the this is during the Cold War, where you don't have
Americans in
just
Russia.
Regular Americans traveling over to Russia
then.
to do much of anything. So the Globetrotters performing in Moscow, this is going to be the first time that, a lot of people, the common people in Moscow are going to be able to see and interact with Americans, not to mention African Americans.
Not to mention a gigantic African American like Wilt.
Right. Now, that's not to say there were some African Americans there, but, they weren't necessarily a traveling basketball team that's going to draw these major crowds in this kind of really big cultural exchange.
Yeah.
So This was quite interesting. I think the only thing that Wilt and his teammates had to complain about, according to the book, was that there just wasn't a whole lot of nightlife to tap into. So Wilt, being Wilt, decides, let me entertain my friends
in the way that only
a man of
a giant.
enormous strength could do. He would go out at night and move cars, picking one end up and then the other end, and like walking these cars into different parking spaces. Though I don't think they stuck around to kind of see if anyone showed up, like walked out, like, where's my car? Although I imagine these being like little trobby cars.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure they weren't like F-150s.
They weren't Cadillacs. These weren't good, hardy Detroit-made cars, you know?
Yeah.
But nonetheless, the man's moving cars.
Yeah, so Wilt loves playing with the Globetrotters. Again, like we talked about the fact that no one's beating him up every time he touches the ball, and he didn't have any pressure.
Yeah, no pressure to have to win, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
and
they just won.
before this, being the star that Wilt was, no matter where he was, the expectation was that they were going to win and win by a lot. And when he went to play with the Globetrotters, it was just fun. Bringing the Washington Generals around and just get smashed repeatedly.
Right.
And, Wilt was actually even playing point guard.
I imagine, like, always having to look superhuman just gets tiring.
Yeah.
You know?
Sometimes you don't feel like it.
Yeah. Like, sometimes you just want to, look, I want to win a game by 5 points and not have anybody complain like, wow, Wilt wasn't as great as I thought he was.
Yeah.
So, on that note.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about his NBA career here in a second, but also Wilt, I think it's important to mention that his time with the Globetrotters was absolutely Wilt's favorite time.
The apex.
Yeah, in terms of basketball. And, he had an itch to compete, which is kind of why he didn't stay with the Globetrotters, even though he probably could have stayed and made almost, if not more, the amount of money that he was going to make in the NBA. But he would continue to go and play with the Globetrotters in the summers just for fun in the offseason. But as we mentioned before, Wilt has already been drafted at this point, and so it's his time to enter the NBA. There's a lot of hype surrounding him at this point. The NBA actually, because in anticipation of Wilt entering the league, expands the season to 75 games. And NBC begins broadcasting games on Saturdays and Sundays. Wilt is also credited for the raising of player salaries in the NBA and, just in general player treatment because Wilt made a lot of demands. Before NBA teams, again, not the money-making machines that they are now, still made good money, but not like they do now. But, players would room together on the road. They didn't have excellent travel conditions and that sort of stuff. And Wilt was like, listen, I'm 7 feet tall. You're putting me in first class because I need some leg room. And also, I'm not sharing a room with this guy. So those are the kind of things that, the Warriors start treating their players a little better because of Wilt. And so other teams sort of jump on that train too. And again, Wilt making just bank in comparison to everyone else. When he enters the NBA, again, more players are like, listen, I might not be Wilt Chamberlain, but I'm pretty darn good. And,
right.
And I also need to be paid more.
Yeah, we probably didn't see a paradigm shift like this again until Michael Jordan.
Yeah. So anyway, Wilt makes his long-awaited NBA debut, appropriately, I think, at Madison Square Garden.
The Mecca.
Yeah.
Kind of hate calling it that.
On October 24th, 1959, where he just lets the world know how it was going to be for the next few years, dropping 42, grabbing 28 rebounds, and blocking 12 shots, which, again, not official, but it was counted by the team's statistician. Up to this point, we have been discussing Wilt's life more or less chronologically. We jumped around a little bit, but that's the flow of the episode so far. But for Wilt's career, we're going to talk about it more thematically. Again, we mentioned before in episode 1 that the book that we used for a lot of our research for Wilt was Robert Cherry's Wilt Larger Than Life. And if you would like a season-by-season breakdown, Cherry does a really great job of taking you through that in his book, and we suggest you pick it up. But for our purposes, we're just going to explore some of the main themes of Wilt's entire career. And so we're going to talk about his relationship with Bill Russell, some of his controversial statements and his politics, and then his overall NBA legacy. So we'll start with Wilt and Bill Russell. So by the time Wilt even got to the NBA, Russell had already established himself as a great winner. It's sort of easy to make this comparison between the two, and I don't think it's necessarily fair. But whereas Wilt struggled to win and be known as a winner, Bill was always a winner. And, you had Wilt, who was the standout individual player, and then you had Russell, who was also a great individual player, but known for his ability to make a team a great winning team.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Bill Russell maybe is celebrated for more so for the stuff that doesn't show up on the stat sheet. You know, I mean, Wilt stuffed the stat sheet. I mean, stuffed it.
And I mean, so did
So
Russell.
Yeah,
In
Russell
terms of
did.
blocks and rebounds, he was a great shot blocker and a great rebounder too.
Right, but I think oftentimes when you compare the two in terms of stats, it looks like, well, obviously Wilt is better. But when you look at the wins, you know, people will argue, oh, well, obviously Bill Russell was better. Yeah, it's hard to kind of quantify whatever je ne sais quoi was that Bill Russell had.
Yeah, and you know, even one of Wilt's teammates spoke to that, and we'll talk about Jerry West made a comment that he later redacted.
It's against the teammate code.
Yeah, I mean, shouldn't have said it, and he regretted it, but he more or less voiced that exact sentiment that even though Wilt he considered to be a better basketball player, there was just something about Bill Russell.
To win one game, he said he would take Bill Russell.
Yeah, and there was just something about Russell that elevated a team.
Unforgivable.
Yeah, and so by the time Wilt gets to the NBA, the specter of Bill Russell is already kind of there. He ended up joining an excellent Boston Celtics team that was already dominating the NBA, and
they just go on a tear.
And even before that, you can see the comparisons even in the NCAA. So whereas Wilt had failed to meet the fan expectation of
delivering the championship,
assumed championships to Kansas, Bill Russell had delivered 2, and it's the only 2 to his alma mater, the University of San Francisco.
And I don't see the University of San Francisco getting any more anytime soon.
No, probably not. Not unless they can get another Bill Russell.
Probably a great program. Great program out there, whoever plays for them.
Shout out to you guys. But so anyway, he ends up being acquired by the Celtics, who were already one of the NBA's best teams. So one of the NBA's best teams already just adds one of the NCAA's best players.
Rich get richer.
Yeah. So he was technically drafted by the St. Louis Hawks and then traded. By the time Wilt steps onto the NBA court, the title of best NBA defender, rebounder, teammate were already kind of Russell's to begin with. And so it kind of begins this gigantic rivalry between the two. So not only were Wilt and Russell sort of destined to duke it out on the court, with the addition of Wilt, the 76ers, well, they were the Warriors then, but Philadelphia was sort of seen as the young up-and-coming team that might challenge the Celtics at some point. And in my opinion, and I don't know if you agree with me or not, Melvin, you know, we hear a lot about the Bird Magic rivalry and how great that was. And I personally wasn't, I never watched Larry Bird and Magic Johnson play each other before my time. And not that I ever watched Bill and Wilt play against each other either, because that was way before my time. But I feel like this rivalry gets underplayed nowadays.
Yeah, I think this rivalry, because of its age, people don't really tend to, at least nowadays, don't tend to look that far back to see it. But and one of the beautiful things about this rivalry is, man, when these guys played, it was Bill versus Wilt. Like they had to guard each other. They played the same position.
They both were their team's best rebounders, and not to mention the fact that this was a great scorer in Wilt against the best defender in the NBA. It is like a direct...
The immovable object meets the unstoppable force.
Exactly, and not to mention, and this is again not to take away anything from the Magic Bird rivalry, but not only did they play each other, same position, they also played each other more often because the league was smaller then.
I would honestly pay just to watch these two rebound against each other.
Yeah, like how...
Like just fire balls off the rim.
Especially then, too. Like, all kinds of elbows and stuff.
Elbows. It was probably trench warfare. But, for me, I definitely... The rivalry is huge. But for me, I still lean towards that Bird Magic rivalry just because it had something special, man. It was like a clash of cultures. It's almost like aliens coming down, and you know what?
Man, I don't know.
Look, it was something special. There was something special. I think that rivalry was the U.S. community kind of put more on that rivalry than I think actually the players did. Because I mean, in a lot of ways, people imagined it being this like black and white thing, but I think like as Bird and Magic would attest, like to them it was like Bird was like, I don't care if like somebody was black or something like that.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of like the cultural impact,
I think Bird he would much rather have been playing against a black guy. He said he took it as an insult when a white guy tried to guard him.
Right, which is crazy
and hilarious. But anyway, Just some numbers on the Wilt-Russell rivalry. They met each other 8 times in the playoffs. Celtics took 7 of those matchups. Russell won 57 of the 94 games that they played during the regular season and 29 of the 49 games they played during the playoffs. Russell also won all 4 Game 7s against Wilt by a combined margin of 9 points. So
that is
razor thin. Can you imagine how great those games would have been to watch? Like,
no, it would have been horrible. If like that's one of my teams, like I'm dying down the stretch.
Yeah.
When I look, unless I'm, hopefully I would have been a Celtics fan because I think I actually may have drank some poison if I had to watch my team lose by a combined total of 9 points over 7 games. I'd probably just kill myself.
Yeah, well, 4 games.
Oh yeah, 4 games.
Yeah,
games.
But those were your Game 7s though.
Oh God.
Yeah, and in their matchups, Wilt outscored Russell 30 to 14 points per game, out-rebounded him 28 to 22 in the regular season. In the playoffs, he outscored him 26 to 15 and out-rebounded him 28 to 24. So they were both putting up numbers on each other.
Monster numbers, yeah.
Incredible.
And what's kind of interesting about this is that these guys are battling on the court, basically just going to war with each other. And then somehow off the court, they're actually friends.
Yeah. No, I mean they were good friends. They had each other over for Thanksgiving when they were in the same cities as each other for, playing games and that sort of stuff. They would visit with each other.
I don't know how you turn it off. Like, how do you
go from just mugging each other on the court to just being best friends?
Maybe it was a competition, like, when they in the kitchen too. Like, he's like, dude, I'm going to eat more than you. And they just kind of go, I don't know. Yeah.
And, they had a really, really good relationship up until around the end of their careers where, there was a game, I think it was a Game 7 too, where Wilt had a knee injury. And it was, I don't know, this is kind of soft to me, but it was the last time Russell was ever going to play against Wilt, and he knew it. And he ends up getting the win, and Wilt takes himself, or the coach takes Wilt out of the game because he was hurt.
Well, no, I think he asked to come out of the game.
We'll have to look. I don't think he did, though.
So let me tell you what I think it is.
All right, go ahead.
What happened was he got hurt in that game, and I think that he asked to come out of the game, and then he was like, okay, I'm good. I can go back in. But the coach was so upset. Like, back then, apparently, you just didn't, like, hey, coach, I need a breather. Or like, my ankle's hurt. I just need to walk it off. Give me a second. The coach was so upset that he would try to take himself out of the game that at that point, he's like, I'm not putting you back in. So when Wilt goes and says, hey, stick me back in the game, I'm good to go, he refuses to put him back in the game. And I think that's when Bill Russell says, I wouldn't have put him back in the game either.
I think you're right about him taking himself out, but if I recall correctly, and I could be wrong, I'm pretty sure Cherry says that the reason he didn't put him back in was because at this time, the coach of the Lakers, when this was happening, Wilt was playing for the Lakers, he and Wilt butted heads a lot, and he had some point to prove. I can win this game without Wilt.
Well, I think that was definitely part of it.
Yeah, and so he didn't put Wilt back in, even though Wilt was ready to go back in. And shortly after that, when Bill Russell is giving a talk at the University of Wisconsin about like race relations or something completely unrelated, he just goes on some like digression about this game, and he says, any injury short of a broken leg or broken back isn't good enough. When he took himself out of the final game, when he hurt his knee, I wouldn't have put him back in the game either, even though I think he's great. That really rubbed Wilt the wrong way.
Yeah, that bridge was, for a while after that, effectively burned.
Yeah, and they eventually squashed the beef, but it took a great long time, and eventually it was a private apology from Russell and then a very public one in an interview, or a feature that sort of like we just recently saw between Magic and Isaiah Thomas.
Yeah, so moving on from his relationship with Bill Russell, Wilt was also he was often criticized for having a lack of political positions.
No, he had some political positions.
He gets there, but it was often said he was no Muhammad Ali or Bill Russell.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even Bill at this time was using his platform.
But this all changes in 1968 after MLK gets assassinated in April. It kind of spurs him to political action. One of the first things that he tries to do is he tries to get the NBA to cancel games following the assassination of King. So, and if you guys aren't familiar with what's going on in the 60s in the United States, you still have a very vibrant civil rights movement that's taking place, and you also have the Black Power movement that's also taking place. And when King dies, it feeds into some of these issues. Things kind of explode in the United States, and you have more of these summers where you have a lot of riots and things breaking out. So this was a very traumatic time, and Wilt Chamberlain is trying to get the NBA to kind of acknowledge this and cancel some games. And the NBA is like, listen, we got to make money.
Yeah.
So they turn Wilt down on that, but he does become more politically active. It just so happens that he becomes politically active in support of
In a very contrarian way.
Tricky Dick Richard Milhouse Nixon. He approaches Nixon and joins the campaign as an advisor, which I think a lot of African Americans at that time were a little taken aback by.
Well, I mean, can we just say what this was? I don't know about Wilt's motivation, whether or not he really believed that Nixon was about what Nixon said he was about. There's a lot of speculation, from Cherry included, that Wilt really liked to be different. By this time, we talked about in the first episode about how Wilt had grown up and been very self-conscious and had this desire to sort of blend in and was never able to. By the time he was in the NBA, he really kind of embraced being a standout, being different, being a contrarian for no reason.
And one thing that we didn't actually touch on earlier enough, I think, is that his concern about, that idea that he was, people thought he was dumb, kind of forced him to become like a really different, smart dude. Like he was very well read. Yeah. Especially by the time he enters the NBA. But, I think on top of that contrarian kind of spark in him, there's also this appreciation for, Nixon's brand of Republicanism.
Well, he also identified with Nixon. Well, first of all, let's just say that he was brought in to the Nixon campaign as sort of like an advisor to
black folk.
Yeah. Like, what does the black community care about? And like these sort of things. And really, they were just, trying to win the black vote by having a
prominent African American that
perhaps
they can
the most prominent African American athlete, at least.
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, certainly you still got Ali.
Yeah, no, that's a.
But Ali ain't. Look, he ain't going. He's not jumping behind Nixon.
No, he's not. And Wilt supports him, but eventually, kind of, I don't know if he regrets supporting Nixon, but he's definitely not thrilled with the outcome. He had some things on his agenda, things like what he considered victimless crimes, like smoking weed, gambling, prostitution, and he sort of expected Nixon to
actually pay attention to his advice. And I think, he was drawn to Nixon because of the loser tag that he thought that Nixon had. But the problem is that Nixon apparently didn't have any real draw towards Wilt. So once Nixon actually is successful in becoming the president of the United States, Wilt discovers very quickly that no one's paying any attention to him in the administration. So all of his kind of concerns and his advice really
fall on deaf ears.
Yeah, they fall on deaf ears. No one takes him seriously.
Yeah, and this was sort of damaging for Wilt in the black community because he took a lot of flack.
He sticks his neck out there for Nixon, and I think that what he needed to, taking this contrarian role, what he needed was for Nixon to kind of to produce some actionable things, some stuff that can say like, hey, look, I know you guys thought I was wrong, but look at what we're doing. And
he didn't.
He doesn't get that. So he looks, at the end of the day, he looks doubly bad, I think, to a lot of African Americans in the 1960s and leading into the 70s.
Yeah. Then another event that sort of hurt Wilt's public image. Now, and again, we should say that Wilt was very popular. He sort of had a reputation as sort of like a mean guy in some circles, but overall, he was still a giant celebrity. So like these things, when we say that it hurt his public appearance and that sort of thing, it's not like it made him,
Yeah, he wasn't a social pariah.
Right. No, he was in the tabloids a lot, and I think he really liked it, and he kind of did some things that put himself in there. For instance, when he published his autobiography, A View from Above, Wilt made his famous claim to have loved 20,000 women.
My God. Wait. First off, I want to take a moment to pause and think about the cojones it takes to title your book The View from Above as a really tall guy. Crazy. But also, sleeping with 20,000 women. Yeah, that definitely set him apart.
Yeah, and in his autobiography, he claims that of these 20,000 women, none of them had ever been married. He'd always used protection. He'd never fathered a child.
Amazing.
You can Google this, and some people have done some math to see if this was actually possible. And it's definitely possible. He talks about his sex life pretty openly in this book and some interviews afterwards and stuff. But it was something like, if I recall correctly, if he became sexually active at like the age of 19 until he made this claim, he would have had something like 3 sexual partners per night or something like that on average, which there are a lot of stories about Wilt's proclivities. So
Right. And you know what? Maybe, every now and then you don't sleep with anyone, but then you have like 10.
then you just have a giant orgy.
Yeah.
Another thing, Wilt was an insomniac. So like he had plenty
He was
plenty
up
of time.
all night.
Yeah.
And here's the other thing, though, that that I think the author's careful to point out is that, in having all of these partners, he was also, he claimed at least to have been very respectful throughout all of this. He also, he didn't want to be kind of pictured as a womanizer.
Yeah.
Which, this kind of issue did cause some ripples at the time.
He made some other comments in that book about, particularly about black women as opposed to like white women as lovers and that sort of stuff. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But sort of going back to when he published this book, it was really poor timing.
Do we know the year?
Well, it was right after Magic had announced that he was HIV positive. And whereas Wilt's claim would have probably got some heavy eye rolls and like, oh, he's so, braggadocious and all that sort of thing, he unfortunately got lumped together with Magic. And it was really unfair.
So Magic held his press conference on November 7th, 1991. And based on my quick research, his book was actually published in October of 1991. So he beat the press conference by just a little bit of time. But
they get lumped together. And, it's, again, in my opinion, not a fair thing at all because, yes, Wilt is sleeping around and whatever, but he's not hurting anybody. And
he's not married.
No, he's not married, whereas Magic was married.
Right.
And at least according to Wilt, he was always using protection.
Yeah.
And Magic clearly wasn't. And so Wilt takes all kinds of flack from the African-American community and from the media and other athletes like tennis star Arthur Ashe criticized both of them. And in his 1993 memoirs, where he wrote that African-Americans have spent decades denying that we are sexual primitives by nature, as racists have argued since the days of slavery. These two college-trained black men of international fame and immense personal wealth do their best to reinforce the stereotype. And, Wilt maintained that he wasn't trying to brag or anything like that. He was just trying to say that sex was a very important part of his life and that he thought it was important to include into his biography.
Yeah, so I mean, from what we can see, Wilt was he seemed almost, to a certain degree, embattled.
Yeah.
He was dealing with this, these attacks from the media, the attacks from, segments of the African American community. And he also,
he took it from Kareem pretty hard.
Yeah, Kareem was not happy with him.
Yeah.
Who was also a very outspoken political activist in his own right.
I don't know this. I obviously never talked to Wilt Chamberlain, but I could imagine that the criticism from Kareem, which wasn't coming out of nowhere, Wilt was definitely taking shots at Kareem too. Probably hurt because Wilt had been like a mentor to Kareem when he was coming up. I forget how much older Kareem was.
Younger?
Yeah, excuse me. But Wilt had mentored him before he became Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and eventually their relationship soured mostly because of Wilt's constant criticism of Kareem that doesn't try hard enough on defense and rebounding and that sort of thing. And Kareem shoots back, you're a giant loser. All you do is lose games. I'm one of the greats. And also he goes as far as to call Wilt a race traitor.
Typical master apprentice stuff.
Yeah, he calls Wilt a race traitor because in his autobiography, he also says that black women are not as sophisticated sexually as white women are.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So that is a quick run through of Wilt's politics and his controversial statements. Do you want to lead us into his NBA legacy?
So to break down his exit from the NBA and his legacy in the league, when he decides to leave the league, he actually signs to be a player coach. This sounds like something from the 3-on-3 league.
I need one of these in the NBA. I mean, we have one in LeBron James pretty much.
Yeah, this is very true. But he signs with the San Diego Conquistadors and officially retires from the NBA on October 7th, 1974, which is, this is all kind of released by Sports Illustrated. And, this doesn't actually work out, the Conquistadors thing.
Yeah, well, that contract that Wilt signed was huge.
How much was it?
$600,000 a year.
A year. So that's, woo. In today's money, that's a lot of cash.
Yes, it is. And that
falls through, though, right?
Because it does fall through because he was still technically under contract from the Lakers because the way contracts were structured then, after the year that your contract ends, your team can exercise, like all player contracts had a built-in team option. And the Lakers were like, if Wilt's going to play basketball, he's going to play for us.
If you're going to play.
Yeah.
You playing in that wine and gold. I'm sorry, not wine and gold.
Yeah, that would have been nice.
Right.
There was no wine and gold then.
I'm stuck on the Cavs.
You should call them the Claps?
The Cavs.
No, but so he was going to play for the Lakers. He was going to play for anybody, and not the Qs. So this goes into arbitration, and it rules in favor of the Lakers. And so Wilt was still able to coach. He just wasn't allowed to play.
And he also claims that he was, even after retirement, he was recruited by NBA teams until the ripe old age of 50.
Which is insane.
Right. Now, we can believe him or we can not believe him, but I'm going to go ahead and say that I bet Wilt Chamberlain at 48 could still get us 10 boards.
Oh, guaranteed.
10 boards. Easy.
Man, insane. Do you want to run us through some of his incredible stats?
All right, so let's break this down. His NBA career average for points per game, a whopping 30.1 points per game, which I believe leaves him second to only Michael Jeffrey Jordan, his airness. Yeah, rebounds per game. I almost feel wrong saying this.
It seems like a typo.
Right, 22.9 rebounds per game. You guys... A 20-point rebound game in the NBA right now is cause celebrate. You know, we pause for a moment and say, you know what? 20 rebounds. Let's take a moment. That's a career night for whoever just ripped those boards down.
Yep.
He held 7 scoring titles, which means he led the league in scoring in a given season. 11 rebounding titles, 8 win share titles. He's the only center in the NBA to have ever led the league in assist, and that was with 702 assists in the 1967-1968 season. So there was a point in time when he decided to de-emphasize scoring, and that's when the assist really started to pick up. But it definitely speaks to the caliber of basketball player that he was.
Yeah, and just a side note, I'm pretty sure in that season there was a lot of speculation that, Wilt is playing like this because he's
getting
slowed
old
down. And he went out and just would randomly string together 3 or 4 games in a row of like 40 plus points.
Just to let you know.
Just to remind you that Wilt Chamberlain can get his whenever he wants.
And some more stats that sound like lies or typos.
Video games.
Averaged in the 1961-1962 season 50.4 points per game and that's averaged 48.5 minutes. And so that's criminal. It
is criminal. And I feel like we probably should have, but it's also one of those things that anyone who knows anything about Wilt Chamberlain know. That season in 1961-62 was when he dropped his incredible 100-point game in Erie, Pennsylvania to an audience of like 100 people. So in this little gym where basketball history was made. And so that was that season. But can you imagine averaging 50 points a game?
More minutes than actually is in an NBA basketball game.
I'll tell you exactly how he did it. Overtime. Well, we already talked about the fact that Wilt never liked to come out of the game.
But coach, can he get a breather?
He didn't want one. The coaches tried to give him breathers. He liked to stay, and he felt like he got cold, and he didn't play as well if he came back in.
I'm all about that. Don't take me out of the game.
Well, that's exactly what he was like. And so he would play the whole game, and then I think there was like 3 or 4 games that went into overtime, and he played just about every minute of those too.
I don't want to hear LeBron talk about mileage.
That's what I'm talking about. Like,
I don't want to hear it anymore.
Players today don't come close to that.
And here's the thing. This man is riding on some rickety planes by today's standards, sleeping in some hard beds by today's standards, and he has none of the like high-tech pools with treadmills and like crazy platelet therapy, whatever that...
Oxygen tanks and cryo chambers.
My God, could you imagine how long he definitely would have played till 50 in 2018, right? Zombie Wilt Chamberlain's got 30 boards tonight.
Goodness.
He also was a 4-time league most valuable player, a 2-time NBA all-defensive first-team player, and he's the only player in NBA history to record, as we mentioned before, a 100-point game. This is maybe the most mind-boggling thing that I've ever seen in my life. He never fouled out of a game in his career.
That's crazy for someone who...
Does that include, like, that's just ever?
Ever. Never fouled out. As a shot blocker, that's incredible.
As a post player to have never fouled out of a game, that is the most mind-boggling thing that I don't even know how that's possible.
Yeah.
They weren't playing basketball. It's not possible.
They were doing something.
He won the Rookie of the Year and the MVP award in the same season. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, it's only been done a handful of times.
Okay. And he also scored 65-plus points 15 times during his career. There have only been 8 other 65-point performances in NBA history. I feel like we don't even mention those.
No.
Like, when they talk about Kobe's 81 game, They're like, yeah, like one other person got like 60, 70 points, whatever. And we just don't even like the Wilt stats are so ridiculous that I feel like the NBA just glides over them, besides the 100-point game.
Kind of, because they were. Like when you're I believe in the 60s when he had 50 a game, it was only 75 games, but like he was going out and dropping 50 at least every night. Imagine, okay, so think about it like this. It's a great game for someone to score 35 in today's NBA.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if Wilt did that, to balance it out, the next game he had to go get 65.
I mean, it's mind-boggling. Like I feel like Kobe's 81-point game is like far more celebrated than Wilt's 100-point game, in part because people saw it.
Yeah,
but
I mean that's the thing. There's just no footage of Wilt scoring these
ridiculous. I mean, what we do
100.
have is like footage of Bigfoot.
where
you're like, I think I saw him block the shot there. But but again, check out the footage we do have. It's incredible.
Yeah, and also I thought it interesting to note that apparently in that 100-point performance, Wilt actually stepped to the line and knocked down a bunch of his free throws. I don't know the exact numbers, but he was shooting them underhand.
The Arif is a
really
proponent of the underhanded free throw.
I'm just saying it works.
As he says, I don't know why more guys don't try it.
They really should. Andre
if you
Drummond.
Can't shoot, why?
What does he have to lose?
Yeah, what do you have to lose besides your dignity?
I don't understand why it's even a dignity thing.
I don't know. It's called the potty shot, the grandma shot.
Hey, look at Rick Barry.
If you get buckets, you get buckets. It don't matter how you get them.
What's his name? Rick Barry's youngest son, who was just in the NCAA. I think he just finished playing. He shot like 93% or something like that from the foul line shooting underhand.
That's better than Steph Curry for you people who don't know.
Come on.
All right.
Check your pride.
So, life after basketball?
Yeah. So, Wilt was great with fans. There were some people who, say they go, Wilt was all arrogant and all this sort of things. But from people who knew Wilt and like Philadelphia fans and like fans of the teams that he played for, like they had great relationships. He had kind of developed this reputation around the league as a villain, which I feel like comes with being the best player in the NBA. When LeBron committed heresy and went to Miami, he became the villain because he committed heresy, but also because he was the best player in the NBA. So he deserved it, LeBron.
I'm going to take my talents to South Beach.
But, Wilt had this quote that I feel like sums up a lot of the way that he was treated by fans who weren't fans of the team he was playing for. And he says that, nobody cheers for Goliath. And Wilt's reputation as Goliath sort of stemmed from the fact that he didn't particularly love playing basketball in the NBA. As we mentioned before, he really enjoyed playing with the Globetrotters, but he never smiled or laughed or anything like that when he was on the court. But off the court, he was very gregarious. He was friendly. He would stop and talk with fans and that sort of thing. And in his biography of Wilt, Robert Cherry puts in an account from a fan of Wilt's that kind of shows just how great of a guy Wilt was to his fans. I'm just going to read it from Cherry's biography. The fan says that Wilt came out to warm up. There was a kid sitting in a wheelchair who looked like he was paraplegic, and just before the game was to begin, the boy's father walked up to Wilt with a basketball. It looked like the father asked him to sign the basketball. It was right before tip-off, and Wilt had his game face on. Wilt just said something to the father, who then walked away. Some of the Baltimore fans booed Wilt for not signing the basketball. After the game, me and my buddies were out in the parking lot having a few beers and waiting for the lot to empty. And from the private entrance, the one where the athletes enter and left, we see the kid, who was about 11, and the father coming out. Wilt was pushing the kid's wheelchair, and on the kid's lap was an NBA basketball with Wilt's signature. He took the kid over to their van, helped the kid into it. The door was open, and Wilt stood there and talked to him for 5 or 10 minutes. There was a crowd of people around, and Wilt had some of his buddies keeping the people back because he wanted time to talk to the kid. I've often thought of this story, and I think of the people who saw Wilt denying the autograph and booed him. Boy, if they only knew. He not only brought the boy out, he wheeled him out. And the look on the kid's face was worth $1 million. How many athletes would you see today do something like that? So that just sort of shows the kind of guy that Wilt was. He was also great to his friends. We haven't touched on this at all yet, but Wilt built this incredible home for himself, and Wilt kind of had this fascination with the stars, and so he named his house Ursa Major, which is the Big Dipper. And so he had this famous or infamous playroom that sounds like it came straight out of a Austin Powers movie. It had a retracting ceiling. He also had a retracting ceiling panel in his room, so he could sleep under the stars, which is something that he really liked to do. But that playroom was apparently like all pink with a waterbed and just
Amazing.
Yeah. And so he held these like crazy parties there too, because as we mentioned before, Wilt was an insomniac.
And one thing that they also point out in the book is that Wilt was quite the budding chef.
Yeah.
So when he did invite friends over, he would often treat them to these just fantastic meals.
So he would have parties and, he'd cook for the parties, or even if he just had like a friend come over, just one-on-one, he would usually cook these like great meals, and he wouldn't let anyone else lift a finger. He would just...
No one touches the dishes.
He would do it all. But it's going back to some of these parties, they talk about it, people came in shifts because, again, Wilt couldn't sleep. So he would have his like one party for his, regular friends, quote unquote, regular friends. And they would come and hang out, and then they would get tired and leave. And then Wilt and all of his like swinger friends would come over and just have a whole different kind of party.
Amazing. Man, he just boundless energy.
Yeah. But going back to the fact that he was a great friend. So not only was it cool to hang out with Wilt and hang out at Wilt's awesome house, but if you were in town and you knew Wilt, he was always quick to go and, he wouldn't just send a car or whatever. He would come get you from the airport. He'd drive you around personally to wherever you needed to be. He was just, they talk about a lot, like they'll say like about Bill Clinton, for instance. Like you talk to Bill Clinton, he made you feel like he's the only person in the room. And I feel like with Wilt, not only did he make you feel that way, but like he actually did. Like if you were Wilt's friend, like you got all of his attention.
You got the special Wilt treatment. And one other thing that's interesting about Wilt is his love for animals, right?
Yeah.
He had a few Great Danes, which seems appropriate for him.
Yeah, to have giant dogs.
Yeah, I feel like he can't have any dogs, any normal or small dogs.
Probably accidentally step on them.
And he also had a special love for horses, which he got one to play polo, but then he decided that he wasn't going to ride it because he felt bad for it carrying all of his weight.
Which, he was a big guy, so...
Yeah, 300 pounds is no joke.
Yeah,
that's more than your average jockey.
Yeah, a lot more than your average jockey.
2.3 jockeys.
Yeah. Crazy. He was also a big champion of women's sports. Going back to his relationship with his sister, Barbara, in his youth, he really felt that she was also a standout athlete, and she hadn't, she had gotten a short shrift because of the fact that she was a woman. And so he did what he could to promote women's sports using his fame and also his money. As early as his high school days, Wilt was a huge fan of track and field. And so this sort of intersected with his love for and support of women's sports when he ended up supporting a women's athletics and track and field club that ended up being called Wilt's Wonder Women. And it was women, like young women who were still, some of whom were trying to get into the Olympics and some who were just considerably younger than that. The very youngest tiers, I think, have a great name called the Mighty Mites, and their age ranged from about 9 years old to 15. And Wilt, it would have been easy for someone like Wilt to just kind of throw some cash their way and to stick his name to it and kind of soak up the publicity. But that's not at all the relationship Wilt had with this club. He was really involved at the ground level. He did finance a lot of their stuff, and obviously his name was attached to it, but he was at their practices. He was just doing regular stuff.
Yeah, raking sand pits, measuring jumps, just the regular stuff that needs to be done.
Yeah, acting like doing the legwork, and just form relationships with these little girls and who like really just absolutely, by Cherry's account, absolutely loved him.
And he knew he knew all of their times, their numbers, all of that stuff. So like he committed a lot of time to supporting these young ladies. Yeah,
and he was also a big proponent of sports within the African American community. There's one story in particular that Cherry highlights that I thought was pretty cool, that Wilt had just sort of heard about this fencing champion, this Olympic fencer named Peter Westbrook, who had a fencing club, I believe it was in New York, and it was just about, I think it was all black kids from around the neighborhood, and it was just a way for them to stay away from some of the trappings of the community that they were in. And Wilt heard about this, and he was really impressed with Westbrook, and so he just called him up one day and was like, "Hey, I heard you've been doing. I had some people check you out, and you seem legit, so I'm going to be your principal sponsor from now on." And they had a few phone calls and that sort of thing, but they never even met each other. But Wilt was just willing to give.
Yeah, just amazing. And I think based on those points, it's really hard to just see him as this kind of apolitical, self-centered athlete. Clearly there was more to him than that, and he served his community and served causes in a different kind of way.
Yeah,
in a way that seemed to fly under the radar.
Things that he believed in.
Yeah,
And when he loved a group of people or loved like a sport or something like that, he was more than willing to put his money where his mouth was. And that also happened with volleyball, for instance. Like he had injured himself one year in the NBA and needed a way to rehab. And so he decided to pick up beach volleyball. And he got really involved with the community of beach volleyball players in California, but also with the sport in general. And he's really credited with popularizing it in the United States because, they had these volleyball clubs that would travel and some people would come and watch, but it was really like a fringe thing then. But then when Wilt gets attached to this volleyball club and they start touring the country, it's like, oh, Wilt Chamberlain's here. Like, I'm going to come watch. And Wilt was never a great volleyball player. He was good. I mean, it would be hard not to be at that size and with that athleticism. But just having Wilt there brought in all these new spectators. And when the International Volleyball Association was formed, it wasn't long lived, but it was formed. And Wilt was like the president of it and eventually ended up in their Hall of Fame.
Take a moment to shout out the Ohio State University's NCAA champion men's volleyball team.
I didn't know that.
No, it's because you're not a real Buckeye.
Wow. Says the Michigander.
Whatever. Okay. So moving on to the end of Wilt's life. Wilt was, in a lot of ways he was a bit of a loner, even though he kept
that kind of comes with the fact that he never settled down with a wife. And to his credit, this is something we didn't touch on, Wilt never tried to, because Wilt never believed that he would be a good husband. And he fully recognized the fact that he's like, listen, I'm not going to be monogamous and I'm not going to try because it's not what I'm built for.
Man, that sort of self-awareness, amazing.
Yeah, and I mean, it's admirable. You know what I mean? I feel like at the time with a lot of this, there's a lot of, he had sex with all these women, like moral, whatever you want to call it. But I personally admire the fact that he was aware enough to know.
He was honest with other people and honest with himself.
Yeah, because I mean, in my mind, it would have been far worse for him to try to be monogamous or pretend to be monogamous and just
fail 20,000 times.
Exactly.
Yeah, so by the end of his life, his parents had passed away, and sadly, his mother died in his arms. His old flames were in relationships, and his body was starting to break down. Which is, I mean, this has got to be really tough for these stellar athletes.
And especially because Wilt really prided himself on being Superman. And so, to make himself vulnerable to anyone must have been really difficult for him.
But as they say, father time is undefeated.
Yeah.
So he was suffering from edema, arthritis was bad, and his friends, they could see that he had these medical issues, and a lot of them believed that, most of them, if not all of them, were correctable.
He didn't want to be put to sleep because he had edema, which was I believe it's the collection of like fluid around the heart or something like that. And he was afraid, even though despite doctors
saying, "Hey, we can do this,"
he was just afraid to go under the knife.
Yeah, and so Wilt, he became more open with his friends towards the end of his life, right?
Yeah, and it seems like he became more open with his friends and like more introspective, and he started writing poetry, and he would write long letters to his friends, more or less saying the things that he wished he'd always said.
Yeah, and kind of calling them at any time of night, just to
You get the sense that he kind of knew that his time was coming to an end.
Yeah, and Wilt died in his house underneath the stars on October 12th, 1999, and he was pretty young. He was only 63 years old.
Yeah.
But that was a 63-year-old body with a lot of mileage, and a guy who really wasn't comfortable taking the necessary medical steps to correct his body's ailments.
Yeah. So that brings us to the end. That was the life of Wilt Chamberlain. Do you have any final thoughts on Wilt?
Final thoughts on Wilt.
Well, all right. So let me ask you. I think I already know the answer to this. What do you think about his reputation as a loser?
Oh, absolutely unfounded. I mean, look.
He had 2 championships.
He's
not Charles Barkley.
He won. I mean, listen, the man won a ton of games. Nobody wins at that rate and deserves to be called a loser. Yeah, I think that's just, he doesn't deserve that title for sure. Now, I'm going to ask you, where do you put him all-time NBA players?
It's really hard because I'm so biased after reading this. It's so hard for me to not be like, oh, one. No, but I mean, here's the thing. I'm one of those people who don't actually put Jordan as the GOAT.
I'm gonna have to resign from this podcast.
Yeah, so whatever. I personally think LeBron is the greatest of all time. I have a tortured relationship with LeBron
goodness.
James.
Hold on. I do want to, for all the listeners out there, Arif is from Northeast Ohio, where nothing is given and everything is earned.
That's right.
He is from the cradle of LeBrondom, so please forgive him for his ignorance.
It's just an objective measure. LeBron is better than Michael Jordan. I'm willing to acknowledge that it's close, but I think in terms of big men, maybe when we do Bill Russell, I'll change my mind, but I feel like with the limited sample size that I have of watching Wilt, I think Wilt has to be at least top 3 in big men, probably top 6 overall.
Yeah, I think that like Shaq in his heyday had reached a point of freakish dominance that I'm not sure we ever
I don't know, though. I think Wilt was more dominant than Shaq.
Well, the thing is that we, with Wilt is that I think really makes him stand out against Shaq is like the dude was just he was huge with a high motor. Like he never had to come out of the game. And there's times where Shaq, like when Shaq needed surgery or something, he's like, yeah, I'm just not, what did he say? I got hurt on company time. I'm going to recover on company time.
Right.
Like, and also you couldn't play Shaq for 48 minutes in it. Shaq would have died if you would have played him for 48.
Especially Shaq,
like 2000 Shaq.
When he played for the Cavs and he was like 310.
When he came out of LSU, he could move. When Orlando Shaq, maybe.
Shaq is to me probably the closest thing to Wilt Chamberlain that I would have ever seen.
Okay, yeah, no, I would agree with you on that.
But I think whole career, I'm probably still putting Wilt ahead of Shaq.
Yeah, I would say in terms of the total body of work, you have to. I'd have to give Wilt the nod on that. So I guess that brings us to the end of Wilt Norman Chamberlain.
Yeah. So that's been the life of Wilt Chamberlain. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, sticking with us through 2 episodes, and we'll catch you next time. Hey guys, just a quick message before you take off. Please remember to subscribe, leave us a 5-star rating and review wherever you're listening to this podcast right now. It really helps get the word out about Life of X. Don't forget to tell a friend. And if you're interested in supporting the show in any other way, please head over to the lifeofxpodcast.com and click on our support page. Thank you.